Hello again, everyone. It's Rob Ryder on Sunday, July 13th, 2014. Excuse me. And today we're going to be talking about your particular church and its diocesan consultors, having to do with governing of the diocese by the diocesan bishop and his senate. And this happens in a particular place, and therefore it's called a particular church. And again, I am Rob Ryder. My email address, if you wanted to contact me, please don't just leave a comment in the video. I won't see it, more than likely. Send me an email. courtofrecord@AOL.com. You send me an email and say, put me on your list, then whenever I do one of these, which hopefully I won't have to do too many more, you'll get a copy of it. And my phone number is 616-712-6179. But I ask you're going to call that we be talking about things along this line and not something else that you're interested in or something somebody else is doing in time on, because I'm a busy man, right? So dude or dudette, will you donate? Please. Right? I don't have time to be looking at other people's stuff. I'm just trying to get my stuff figured out because I believe it's this path, right? So I can't be looking at what other people do. Not that I don't think they should do it. No, they should. Everybody should do what they think is correct. Go do something, period. Right? But we can't all be digging in the same holes. I'm digging in this one over here. So if you can donate so I can dig some more, I'd really appreciate it. PayPal account is my daughter, Ashley Ritlewski, at gmail.com. That is the PayPal account name. Or you can mail it to snail mail, 10955 14 Mile Road, Rockford, Michigan, 49341. What do we got going on here? What is it about a particular church and its diocesan consultors? Well, I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and this is the website for the Cathedral of St. Andrew. Right? The Cathedral of St. Andrew is the Catholic cathedral. Which is, different than this other one here, which is the, wait for it, come on baby, right? This is the website for the Diocese of Grand Rapids, Roman Catholic Diocese of Grand Rapids. Why do they have different websites? Why does the cathedral have its own website? And it's the same in Phoenix, it looks like. It's the same where Rose at. I think if you look, you're going to see that not only is there a website for the Diocese of, there's also one for the cathedral. And that could end up being quite important. So, just real quick, let me get back to this other one. So here's my cathedral. And the thing about the cathedral is, let's take a look here. Where clergy? Two things we'll look at, then we'll get moving. Come on. The clergy and staff, right? So the clergy is headed by a rector. So I wanted to point out a rector, and these all. So there's a rector, and that's including him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Looks like 5 reverends. All of the CSP, which is a Paulist father, it's a religious order. So they're not secular priests. This is a religious order. And they are the ones that control they're the clergy of the cathedral for the church, of the particular church. And we'll see why that's important. One other thing is, if we look at under ministries, faith formation, I think I missed it. I think it's parish life. Let's see. Yeah, sorry. One more time. Parish life. There's the ministry of hospitality, which is what the ministry of usher is, or the ministry of ostery, or the ministry of porter. The one that Paul VI said is no longer a minor order, but is going to be for the It's going to be a ministry that you can get by institution, canonical institution, of a layperson into the office of usher, porter, whatever the office is called, but it's the ministry of hospitality. Well, the ministry of hospitality can go all the way back to the Hospitalators, which eventually became the Knights of Malta. So it gives you an office within the church, within this particular church. And this particular church, because it's a particular church, is the embodiment of the Catholic Church in one location, of the whole Catholic Church in one location. So instead of trying to explain it that way, we'll just start reading. But just pointing out, when you go looking, you're going to see that there's two different websites. One for the cathedral, and the other one is for, let's call it the corporate side of the church. And the two don't really have anything to do with each other. That's what's important for us. So let's begin. Particular church. In Catholic canon law, a particular church is an ecclesiastic community headed by a bishop or someone recognized as the equivalent of a bishop. And that's important to understand, that when they use that lowercase bishop, a whole bunch of people that could mean. And even in this case, they're talking about an ecclesiastic community. It isn't even talking about a building necessarily, right? It's an ecclesiastic community. It's a body. It's a member. It's a member. There are two kinds of particular churches: local particular churches and autonomous particular churches. Okay, there are 23 autonomous churches. One Western, that would be the Latin Church, and 22 Eastern, because all these Eastern Catholic churches all have their own little system, which is fine with the Catholic Church. They all had their own little doctrine. They wanted to do it their way, how they wanted to celebrate. They're still part of the Catholic Church. It's just in the Western, Latin, there's one. Autonomous. If they're autonomous, they have kind of self-governing, right? So they're going to have their own laws. That's why the canon law of 1983 just applies to the Latin Rite. But then the Eastern churches came up with their own in 1990, and I'm sure they're not that much different. They're just going to use different words for the same thing. But we're interested in the one called the local particular church. Each diocese, lowercase diocese, or eparchy, that's what they call it in the Eastern, is also a local or particular church, though it lacks the autonomy of a particular church described above. A diocese is a section of the people of God entrusted to a bishop to be guided by him in the assistance of his clergy, so that, loyal to its pastor, informed by him, into one community in the Holy Spirit through the gospel and the Eucharist, it constitutes one particular church in which the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ is truly present and active. That's what makes it different than the rest. Right? It's the one particular church in which the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ is truly present and active. So that's the universal church, and that's really what the jurisdiction I'm trying to get to. And so, okay, you got to go to the cathedral. Right? Don't go to the diocese. There must be something to do with this cathedral. Each is considered to be the embodiment in a particular place or for a particular community of the one whole Catholic Church. It is these and formed out of them that one and unique Catholic Church exists. So your diocesan bishop sitting in your diocese is your pope, basically. He's in charge of that frickin' diocese. All right, now he has to answer to the pope, but by all intents and purposes, as long as he's the one who governs by canon law. Okay, so basically, right, this particular church is, they're calling it a diocese, and they're calling it a diocese is an ecclesiastic community headed by a bishop, someone recognized as equivalent of a bishop. Well, all right, what's the community that the bishop is heading up? It's the people of the diocese. Each diocese is also a local particular church, though it lacks autonomy, a particular church described above. All right. So that one ain't too hard. Well, what's that got to do with the cathedral? A cathedral, from cathedra, I mean in the seat, thus serving as the central church of a diocese, conference, okay? So there it is. It's the central church. That's what the cathedral is. And this one here in, right, it's the Cathedral of St. Andrew. Churches with the function of cathedral are specific to those Christian denominations with an episcopal hierarchy, bishop hierarchy, such as Roman Catholic, Anglican, Orthodox, and some Lutheran and Methodist churches. Not universal within the Western Catholic Church until the 12th century, by which time they had developed an architectural form, institutional structures, and legal identities distinct from parish churches. Right? So this one is all different than all the rest of the little parish churches. When the church at which the Archbishop or Metropolitan presides is specifically intended, the term cathedral church is used. Following the Protestant Reformation, the Christian Church, which that could still be the Catholic Church because it is the Christian Church, in several parts of Western Europe, such as Scotland, Netherlands, Swiss cantons, all the places we think is Protestant, adopted a Presbyterian polity that did away with bishops altogether. Now, see, this is all happening in, part of Western Europe that they didn't say England, but the same thing is happening in England. And we're going to find out that the United States is set up based on the way things were in England. That's what it sounds like. So you could have a Catholic church that didn't have a bishop. It would have a bunch of the Presbyterian polity. It just did away with the bishop. Right? Still answering to the Pope as the bishop, but getting rid of their local bishop. Or just keeping the office there, but not filling it. When ancient cathedral buildings in these lands are still used for congregational worship, they generally retain the title and dignity of cathedral, maintaining and developing distinct cathedral functions, but void of hierarchical supremacy. Okay, from the 16th century onwards, leading to the founding of a large number of new dioceses with associated cathedral establishments of varying forms in the Americas. So the dioceses that were created here in America aren't necessarily the same as the dioceses that are in Europe. In an established diocese in Europe, the cathedral would have a group of guys called, or a group of clergy called the cathedral chapter. But they don't have that in America. We have diocesan consultors. And we'll get into that, why that is. So that's why what we think of as a diocese isn't a diocese in the proper use of the word with the church, because it doesn't have these the cathedral chapter. Instead, it has a group of people called the diocesan consultors. So it's not a diocese in the true form of the word. It just acts like a diocese. So the diocesan bishop isn't a bishop in the true form of the word. He just acts like a diocesan bishop. Right? He's fulfilling some duties of a bishop, but there's lots of people that can do that. Consequently, it's not uncommon to find Christians in a single city being served by 3 or more cathedrals, differing denominations. Right? So if there's a cathedral in your town, and this goes back to the guy that was out in Santa Fe who asked the court clerk, doesn't the bishop hold your oath? And she said yes. And he had some more questions. He said, well, you may get better answers if you went down the road to the next town. Well, he's in Santa Fe, and in Santa Fe is where the Catholic archdiocese happens to be. But the next town down, and I can't remember which one it is now, but it's another town in New Mexico, is where the Episcopal diocese is. the Episcopal Cathedral. You see, it's in these cathedrals that the real chancery is at. That's where the real records are, as we'll see we get through some of these definitions, right? All this builds on top of each other, why it is the way it is, but it all has to do with one particular church. Or there could be different particular churches for different denominations. Where a parish church serves temporarily as a cathedral for a diocese is termed procathedral. The cathedral of archbishop is called the metropolitan cathedral. The term cathedral is often applied colloquially to large and impressive churches, regardless of whether they function as a cathedral. To function as a cathedral, you have to have a hierarchy of, right? That's one of the things. I shouldn't say that. They got away with that. So, ironically, the Crystal Cathedral was recently purchased by the Catholic Church and has since been converted to a genuine cathedral. So it wasn't. It was just called one. But now the Catholic Church has purchased it, and they're going to make it one. So what's the definition? The word cathedral is derived from the Greek word cathedra, seat or chair, and refers to the presence and prominence of the bishop, archbishop's chair or throne, raised above the clergy and laity and originally located facing the congregation from behind the high altar. In the ancient world, a chair or raised on a raised dais was a distinctive mark of a teacher or rhetor, and thus symbolized the bishop's role as a teacher. A raised throne within a basilica hall was also definitive for late antique presiding magistrates, and a cathedra who symbolizes the bishop's role in governing his diocese. And as it turns out, Constantine made all these bishops civil magistrates. They still are. Right? It's just they do their business from the cathedral. It's the official seats where the throne is. But the throne can also embody the principle that the cathedral makes a bishop, and both specifically in that the bishop is elected within the cathedral and is inaugurated by being enthroned within the cathedral by the acclamation of clergy and laity, right? Because your bishop, the way it was in the old days, a bishop was selected by the people of the congregation. Yet we have these the pope is appointing a bishop. Well, that's over here in the diocese, but not necessarily at the particular church, where the members of the clergy, since there is no laity, see these members of the clergy, because they are in a religious order, they are in the church. They've just given up their sovereignty. So they're not citizens, they're servants. Right? So they don't show up in the 800, 900 people that are in Vatican City State because they're servants. They took the office of servant. So they're not a sovereign, like a cardinal is. Well, that's what we're trying to get, that type of, see, we're going that way. We're going that door as the sovereign, and these are our servants. Anywho, because they're clerks, right? That's all it is, a bunch of clerks. Well, who do clerks work for? They work for the sovereign. Well, that's what we need to be. We're just going to have a different status in the church than they do. And this, there's a distinction between those church traditions, predominantly those Orthodox, Celtic, Ireland, those church traditions whose bishops have tended predominantly to rise through the ranks of the cathedral clergy. Okay, so the cathedral clergy, right, for this, for my cathedral, here's the cathedral clergy. They're all part of the same Paulist Fathers religious order. And there's one guy that's the rector, and all the rest are lower. What's the chances this dude is sitting here as the bishop? You look at the definition of rector, as we will, it says he could be a bishop. Right? And then here's 4 other guys below him that are all holding some office. So this is the cathedral clergy that they're speaking of by those church traditions whose bishops have tended predominantly to rise through the ranks of the cathedral clergy. Well, all the cathedral clergy are these guys called the Paulist Fathers, and the one at the top is a guy that's known as the rector. Okay, so what all happened, right? The history of cathedrals starts in 1313 when the Emperor Constantine the Great personally adopted Christianity and initiated the peace of the church. Indeed, in strict terminology, it could not have been cathedrals before that date, as before the 4th century there were no Christian cathedra. Bishops were never seated when leading congregational worship. Instead, they stood on a platform. All right, so there's a difference between standing on a platform and sitting on a platform. One, you're an orator. The other one, you're a king or a sovereign, I guess. Or sitting there as a judge. Okay, anyways, and then it goes on to talk about there was this early church they found that because it had been buried into the earthworks of a fortification. And so, and they found it. They got inside. This thing was from 256, complete Christian house. Right? Show you how it was in 256, the Dura Europos. Right? If you want to know what a Dura church looked like in the 3rd century, they have one to take a peek at. We're not going there now. So anyways, then in 269, soon after Dura fell to the Persian army, a body of clerics assembled a charge sheet against the bishop. See, it says a body of clerics, now it doesn't say who it is, right? But this is the Persian army in 269. Who are the clerics? Could have been Jews. Amongst the accusations was Paul, who had received the civil rank of Deaconarus due to his contacts in the imperial court, had improperly erected an enclosure or secretum for himself in the church Antioch. Right, so this dude is the bishop of Antioch. Right, that's where the Apostle John was the bishop, if I'm not mistaken. And he trained a female choir to sing hymns of his own devising. And he had erected a throne. These practices were all condemned as innovations, improperly importing symbols of his secular Roman magistracy, right? His, because the guy was a civil magistrate, into the church ritual, while presumptuously and blasphemously asserting that the person of the bishop in Eucharistic worship is seated in the place of Christ himself. Well, that's all the shit that Catholics believe, so whoever these guys are certainly weren't Catholics, they weren't Christians. Right? They were Judeo-Byzantines. There was such a thing. Just like Judeo-Christians today, they were called Judeo-Byzantines. They're double-minded, they don't know what it is. They just want to control you, so they're going to use both books. Yet within 100 years, all bishops in the Mediterranean, so this guy is being blamed for this, but in 100 years, they all have cathedrals, they all have thrones, and they're all enclosed in a sanctuary space. And they've all established choirs and blah, 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 blah. All the things that whoever these clerics were bitching about, the body of clerics, they weren't the Catholics, because within 100 years, all Christian churches in the Mediterranean had the same thing. So we're saying by 356. The driving principle underlying this change was an acceptance by bishops, more or less willingly, of an imperial invitation to adopt and maintain the duties, dignity, and insignia proper to a public magistrate. They made the bishops a public magistrate. But he only does his business out of the cathedral. That's where the throne is. Characteristically, so that's where the court is. A Roman magistrate presided from a raised throne in a large, richly decorated and aisled rectangular hall called a basilica. And now bishops would do the same. Constantine's declaration of imperial favor towards Christianity transformed all aspects of Christian life in the Roman Empire. We got our own churches. We got our own courts. Cathedral buildings, certain elements are found all over. Basilica halls previously been the characteristic of major civil complexes and military headquarters buildings, now became the standard structure for accommodating large Christian congregations. Right? They had a form of building called the basilica. They could build to make big halls. It's what the engineering at the time allowed, a thing called a basilica. But these new basilicas were wholly different in scale from the early Christian churches, different in form of any Roman non-Christian temple or religious structure. Right? Because they looked like imperial courts, because they were imperial courts. An enclosure at the eastern end of the church surrounded the altar, a synthronus east of the altar facing west. A synthronus. I tried to find the synthronus. It's hard to find the definition, but it's like saying, when that guy is sitting there, he's the embodiment of the emperor, the king, right? Priest, prophet, and king, basically. I'm thinking. And consisting of a raised dais and centrally placed bishop's throne and benches on either side for the clergy of his familia. Well, these benches on either side could be what's called the choir. And depending on who's sitting in what box in this choir, it tells you what they do within the church. It's part of the symbolism within the cathedral. It's also going to have a baptistry. Commonly adopted centralized plans derive from funerary chapels and are invariably separate from congregational basilica. Right? So they're going to be there, but maybe not in the same place. But the cathedral complex always included an episcopal residence. That's important because that's where business is done for the episcopacy. All presbyters and deacons who also expected to live apart from their wives after ordination, the episcopum also commonly provided private dining halls, hospitality expected, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Cathedral finances. Just as the episcopal residence was integral to the complex of the cathedral building, so too was no distinction between episcopal, diocesan, and cathedral property and endowments. It's all a community of property. And whichever one of these you're within the jurisdiction of, it seems to me, right, that they have your share of the property. But in accepting from Constantine the status of civil magistrates, bishops were now also committed to substantial expenditures to maintain their new style and status, also to fulfill the associated duties, for instance, in employing qualified legal assessors to support them when sitting as civil judges. Right? We need to get the frickin' bishop, who's ever playing the part of the bishop, to be sitting as a civil judge, and he's going to be doing that when he's on his throne. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be the throne out there by the altar. They have this little portable one. And I hope I get to it in this video. And it talks about with that portable one, that's the one that these lower clergy are allowed to sit in and act as the bishop. Now the charitable compass became general. Bishops were especially expected to take responsibility for raising ransom funds. Right? And this piece of the church is what gave them this power. And so now they're going to have the personnel of the cathedral. Range of minor orders had since grown, and so they're considered the clerical militia. And you went up these ranks just like anybody else, spend a certain time in each one. It's almost like a military hierarchy within the church. These deacons and priests, as they work their way up the ladder of different offices within the church's hierarchy. Around 450, Justinian ordered that clerical payroll should be strictly limited to 60 presbyters, 100 male deacons, 90 subdeacons, 110 lectors, 25 singers, 100 doorkeepers, there's them doorkeepers, and 50 female deacons, 525 in all. Right? Were supported by one particular church. Bishops were at the head of the local church. but not explicitly within the cursus honorum, as appointment was to be election from local clergy and the people. Yeah, okay, they had another way they could do it, because a lot of these bishops were from this particular class of Roman citizen. But over time, because the bishops are supposed to be appointed by people within the church, they were appointing them. Most bishops came from the curial class, that is, those holding a hereditary rank of decurion with an obligation to serve on the city council. What's the chances that your bishop serves on the city council of the city where the cathedral is? I wonder if he's the mayor. That would be interesting. So who are these diacons? Administrative. Member of a city senate. Were drawn from curial class, which made up of wealthy middle class citizens in a town society. Yada yada yada. Perhaps most importantly, in imperial government, they also supervised local tax collection. That's interesting. So who supervises local tax collection within the city where the cathedral is? I don't know if any of this really matters, right? But it's all about who's who. Then you had presbyters and archpriest, doorkeepers, right? That's the office of ostrary. That's what the Pope was talking about some time ago. Functions is providing a forum for civic leadership. Well, go figure. Rules of the clergy. Originally, the bishop, the cathedral clergy formed a kind of religious community, right? Which is what those Paulist fathers do, right? They form a kind of religious community, which is not in the true sense a monastery, which it isn't, and nevertheless was called a monasterium before the word took on a restricted meaning. The cathedral clergy were to live under a common roof, occupy a common dormitory, and submit to authority of a special officer. I think that'd be the rector. Late Middle Ages, secular cathedrals. The other class was that of a college of clergy, bound by no vows except those of ordination, but governed by a code, right, the canons, hence the name of canon. So you had a college of clergy, but because they're attached to the cathedral, they're just called the cathedral chapter. In this way arose distinction between monastic and secular cathedral churches. Cathedrals ruled by a secular chapter, the dignities of provost, dean, precentor, chancellor, treasurer, right? That's where those come from. And we were looking for the provost or dean or the archdeacon, because that was who you were supposed to go to have the office of ostry, the office of doorkeeper, the office of porter, all the same thing, conferred on you. And he was the one to take you to the diocesan bishop. Well, where are they at? They're at the cathedral. Provost, we're looking for the dean, and we're going to these little ass deaneries. Well, that isn't the same thing. A rector, as it turns out, is the same as a dean. In Europe, they use the word rector for the guy that's in charge of a university. Well, I think here we would use the word dean. While the non-residents of canons, rather than their perpetual residents, became the rule, their dignities were performed by a body of vicars. Right? So what happened now is in these old European systems, these members of this college were the cardinals. And the cardinals, right, were holding it because of a hereditary reason, and they would actually appoint a vicar, a deputy, to sit there for them and perform the functions of the job in their name by using a legal fiction. Right? So they were non-residents. These canons in the secular period didn't live under the same roof. Blah 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 blah. Right? That's the way it is in the old country, but we don't have that here. But that's the way it is with the college or the cathedral chapter. Almost everybody that you would actually see at the cathedral is somebody's vicar, their deputy. Right? The guy holding the office doesn't show up but a few times a year. And so this is how or why it must be when royalty had 3 or 4 sons. Well, only one of them is going to get to be the king. What are you going to do with the rest of your boys, right? You give them these offices within the church. Right, and you make them these the consultors basically for the bishop. Then they have somebody stand in for all the other things. But whenever the bishop needs their consultation, it's them they're going to talk to. Right, many new churches were built which served the regional administrative functions of cathedrals. In Germany and parts of Europe, so the Lutheran Church, right? They have these. In fact, the Lutheran Church here, where the Catholic Church calls Michigan the province of Detroit, I believe it's a Lutheran Church. It's Lutheran or Methodist. I'm almost positive it's the Lutheran Church. Calls it the District of Michigan. They call Ohio the District of Ohio. However, not all churches that function as a seat of the bishop are known as cathedral. The custom vary from place to place. Right, so what are some of these offices now? You had the provost, was charged not only with internal regulation of the church and oversight of the members of the chapter and control of the services. This really sounds like a rector. But was also the steward of lands and possessions of the church. Still sounds like a rector. But then what it says, complaints were soon raised, the provost too much mixed in worldly affairs and was too frequently absent from his spiritual duties. This led many cases to the institution of a new officer, the dean. Now that could be the rector. And so the other guy isn't there, it's the dean, who has charge of that portion of the provost's duties which related to the internal discipline and chapter of the services of the church. In some cases, the office of provost was abolished. In others, it was continued. The provost, who was occasionally the archdeacon as well, remained head of the chapter. Now, that's also interesting. Right? Because there's that archdeacon that we're trying to get to. The provost, who was occasionally an archdeacon as well. So, if a rector is a dean, then the dean, rector, that is at the cathedral, he's not the provost, he's the dean. And the provost isn't there because he's mixed in worldly affairs and too frequently absent from his spiritual duties. Well, the guy that could be is the guy that we think of as the bishop. Right? He's actually an archdeacon. Because I don't know. Well, somebody has to tell me when. Somebody has to show me the paper that shows when the guy that's wearing the hat as the bishop was ordained as a ordained priest, not an ordained deacon. Because they're both ordained, but you get ordained deacon first, and then you would be ordained a priest later. Well, show me the piece of paper that says that they were ordained as a priest. I haven't found one yet. I see it says when they got their ordination, but it's the first one. Well, that would be ordination as a deacon. In England, the provost was almost unknown, and that's the point. We don't know who the provost is. We never see him. Or it's the bishop being brought over to the cathedral to be the provost. He was an external officer with authority in the government of the church. Had no stall in the choir and no vote in the chapter. Well, all those things could be said about the guy who wears the hat as the bishop within the diocese. right? Because he does come to the cathedral and he does do things there and yada yada yada. But normally he's out in the world. He's not at the cathedral, and he left it in charge of the rector. In Germany, a few of the cathedral churches, the south of France, the provost was the ordinary head of the cathedral chapter, but the office was not common elsewhere. Right? The provost was the head of the cathedral chapter. Okay, well, who's the head of the? We don't have cathedral chapters now. We got these consultors, but who's their head? Secular chapter. The normal constitution of chapter of secular cathedral church comprised 4 dignitaries. There might be more. In addition to the canons, these were the. So this is not the canons who would be there, although they're not residents there, right? But they have vicars, and I think that's what we're talking about now. Their vicars are the dean, the precentor, the chancellor, the treasurer. These 4 dignitaries occupy the 4 corner stalls in the choir and called in many of the statutes a quatuor majoris persone of the church. So if you could identify where the choir is in your church and you find these 4 stalls, right, you'll know who's playing the dean, who's playing the chancellor, who's playing the treasurer, who's playing. The one it didn't mention is the rector. Right? So is the rector going to be sitting in the dean's chair? I haven't found a good place to see where all these seats are yet, but it's just this idea that, okay, they're going to be in specific locations in this area of the church called the choir, which is the part where at the end of the church is the sanctuary, then you have the choir, then you have the nave where all the people sit. But on the sides between the sanctuary and the nave, these seats are facing in to the aisle, not towards the altar. That's the choir. They got boxes or seats or whatever the hell they call them, and certain people sit in certain places. That's where the chessboard is. Dean, who was originally elected by the chapter and confirmed in office by the bishop. Okay, the dean is president of the chapter. Well, if he's president of the chapter, then the dean is the guy that's leading the chapter. He's presiding over the chapter. He's the president. So that, again, that's the rector. He's the president of the chapter. I thought it was a diocesan bishop that did that. Oh well. But then a diocesan bishop doesn't need to be a bishop to be a bishop. Be called diocesan bishop. Chancellor of the Cathedral Church in charge with oversight of its schools. Okay. Often the secretary and librarian. He's assigned the easternmost stall. Okay. So each of these, the dean sits in the choir usually at the west end of the south side. There you go. Get your scorecard out. I got to get moving here. The chapter was the bishop's concilium, and he was bound to consult in all important matters, and without doing so, he could not act. All right, this is all getting down to the fact we need to go to the cathedral. Through its hierarchical organizational position, the church structure, function of the cathedral, but may also be closely associated with civil and communal life of the city and the region. Farthest from the main entry is the sanctuary. I think that Rowe said, I had to find that link, the sanctuary is on the east end of the church, facing the sun. But from the east side of the church, you can get into the office of the chancery. Right? So we are normally coming in the back door of the church, and the front door, where the administration's done, or the back door, is on the other end of the church. So there may be an entrance on the east end of the church into the area called the office of the chancery. All right? Apart from its organizational function as the seat of the bishop, right? That's the main thing. And meeting place of the chapter of the diocese, the cathedral has a liturgical function as offering daily church service. And we think that's all it's for, but its real function is the organizational function as the seat of the bishop. There is often additional services on Sunday. Cathedrals generally have an area dedicated to the performance of choral services, and with seating especially for the choir and dignitaries of the church and town. This part of the building is called the choir, or choir, Q-U-I-R-E, and is generally located between the sanctuary and the nave. Cathedrals always have a font. Many cathedrals are regulated as places that have provided regarded as places that have provided rewarding religious experience where prayers have been answered and miracles have taken place. Yes, we're going to have a miracle take place because they're going to put you in the right jurisdiction. Civil and social functions. Now this is interesting. Births, marriages, and deaths are often celebrated by services at the cathedrals, and the cathedral often acts as a repository of local history by recording these events. But who has a birth, marriage, or death recorded at the cathedral? Nobody that I know of, and maybe that's what we're supposed to do, is take our birth certificate that we can get, or our certificate of live birth, whatever it is, that they say is an important piece of paper. Well, what are you supposed to do with it? Maybe you're supposed to take it to the church and have them record it in the cathedral records, not the local parish that has nothing to do with the cathedral. And it's the cathedral that's the particular church that is one of the members of the body of Christ. The rest of the churches aren't. Another civic function of the cathedral is the imparting of significant civil information. Announcements may be to the populace from the steps of the cathedral or within the cathedral itself, right? Maybe all sorts of civil information there we're supposed to be getting that we never get. Cathedrals are often associated with significant secular organizations such as the office of the local mayor and the council, the local court, the local regiment, schools, sporting organizations, service clubs. I wonder if there's something we need to be doing at the cathedral. Let's keep going now. Man, that's only 2 of them. I got 9 of these to go through. I don't know if I'll make it through them all. Okay, now this is the throne itself. Originally, the bishop's cathedra stood in the center of the apse, flanked on either side, though on a lower plane, by the benches of the assistant priest. In several Roman basilicas, a niche for the bishop's cathedra was constructed in the wall of the apse. But this arrangement was exceptional. There was the interesting thing about this. I can't read all this, man. The term cathedra was applied also to the see of the bishop. Canon 41, the Council of something in 789, refers to the cathedral church as distinguished from other churches of the diocese. The term for the official seat of the bishop thus employed for the bishop's church. By definition, ex cathedra meant a formal, infallible decision of the pope, obligatory on the faithful, because each bishop is the pope of his diocese. Now, here's the other one, the faldstool. So I got this big ass they got a big throne sitting up there by the altar in the middle of the church. A little inconvenient maybe for day-to-day operation. So a movable folding chair used in pontifical functions by the bishop outside of the cathedral, or within it if he is not at his throne or cathedra. Other prelates enjoying the privilege of full pontificals also use it. So if the rector has full pontificals, he could use it. Right? It's just another chair. It's a little stool, a faldstool, in a different part of the building. The rubrics prescribed it as the seat in conferring of baptism and holy orders. Now, we're not trying to get holy orders, but they used to be minor orders. And it's an institution. In the consecration of oils, the ceremonies of Good Friday, etc. Well, how about canonical institutions, right? Because that could be an etc. So, it isn't the big ass throne. It's this little frickin' footstool, basically. Red, green, violet cloths are ordered as a covering to correspond to the season or rank of the prelate. It may have once been something like a camp stool, and it occupied the bishop in his journeys, and accompanied the bishop in his journeys. Right? It's his portable throne. The fald. That's what we need to ask him. Where's the fald stool? Who can sit on the fald stool? That's who you want to talk to. Chapter. Name chapter, certain corporation, ecclesiastic bodies, blah, 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 blah. They got certain rules, hence we speak of collegiate chapters and cathedral chapters. If it be a cathedral chapter, however, its principal object is to assist the bishop in the government of his diocese, and the choir service is only secondary. Members of chapters are called canons. Now, again, we don't have chapters in America, but the diocesan consultors' job is to do what this chapter used to do. Considered as a body, these clerics are called the presbyterium. The chapter can be considered as forming one body with the bishop, in as far as it constitutes his senate and aids him in the government of the diocese, or as forming a body distinct from the bishop, having its own regulations and interest. Okay, because one, they're the Paulist followers, and the other one, they're helping the bishop govern the diocese, at least for me. Okay. The bishop must always be distinguished from it, nor can he be called a member of the chapter. So if the bishop would have to be ex officio. Of course, we don't have chapters. Anciently, the principal dignitary of the chapter was the archdeacon. But from the 11th century on, the dean, who was also an archpriest, had the internal government of the chapter. In some countries, this dignitary is called the provost. Right, so there we are again. We got archdeacon, archpriest, dean, provost, all using the same frickin' sentence. Well, a rector can be a dean. The nomination of the head of the chapter belongs to the Pope. As the head of the chapter, as a corporate body, is a president, who, as before said, is called in different countries various names. Those prevailing one is that of a dean. The peculiar statutes or customs of each chapter or diocese or country must be examined to know what dignitaries, in addition to those mentioned, form part of the capitular body. Which is an interesting thing. I don't know if we'll get to it, but so we should be able to go to the chancery at the cathedral to find out who's been appointed, because it had to be appointed, to be the diocesan consultors. Now, they don't like to use those words now, and this is from 1917, a lot of these words, this diocesan consultor, and it doesn't look like they use it much anymore in America. It looks like they're going to call it the diocesan synod. But what it isn't is it's not the diocesan curia or the college of consultors. Those words are used. You can find them. That's what they're calling some of these groups now. But I don't know that that's what they are, because none of those guys are at the cathedral. And that's the whole thing. It's who's running the cathedral, because that's the particular church. Among such other officers may be named, okay, a lot of different names that really have nothing to do with this. They also have a certain preeminence so that they may be made judges delegate of the Holy See in preference to other clergy and to canons of collegiate churches. Right? Judges delegate of the Holy See. So in other words, the Holy See has made them a judge. These members of this particular cathedral chapter, which has been replaced now by diocesan consultors, who are supposed to be doing the functions of the cathedral chapter. Like every other ecclesiastical corporation, the chapter has the right of possessing and administering the property over which it has dominion. Excellent. So that means that there now puts them under Vatican City state law because they're administering the patrimony of the Holy See. Okay. In the United States, cathedral chapters have not as yet been constituted. And reading about that, it looks like they never will be. Ecclesiastic residence, right? Because it talked about at the diocese, the bishop having his episcopal residence. A remaining or abiding where one's duties lie, or where one's occupation is properly carried on, as the presence of the bishop in his diocese, a rector or incumbent in his benefice, a canon in his cathedral, blah, 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 blah. It's not where you sleep, it's where you do your duties. It may be noted that by fictional law, one who is lawfully absent fulfills the law of residence. Yeah. You got somebody doing it in his name. Residence is binding on clerics holding benefices. And a rector holds a benefice. And so that's why the rector's there. A canon is not obliged ordinarily to dwell in close proximity to his benefice. It suffices that he be able conveniently to be present at the prescribed hours. But we don't have canons because canons go with the cathedral chapter. A pastor is obliged to dwell in his parish and is generally speaking, by reason of local statutes, in the parochial residence or rectory. Because of greater responsibilities resting upon them, the church insists that patriarchs, primates, metropolitans, bishops, or others in charge of dioceses or quasi-dioceses, even though they may be cardinals, live within their own territory, though not necessarily in the episcopal city. Bishops, moreover, are admonished by the Council of Trent not to be absent from their cathedrals unless their episcopal duties call them elsewhere in the diocese during Advent, Lent, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, Corpus Christi. The Chancery Office, the official center of diocesan business, will be found more properly at the cathedral, even though the bishop resides elsewhere. The Chancery Office, the official center of diocesan business, which will be found more properly at the cathedral, even though the bishop resides elsewhere. Sounds like the Chancery Office is at the cathedral. While the chapter may never be absent, individual members may annually. Okay, so there's always somebody there. Bishops are counseled not to allow parish priests or rectors of missions more than 2 months' leave. Canons lose their share of the daily distributions unless actually present. We don't have canons. Besides being guilty of a mortal sin, bishops and rectors who violate the law of residence forfeit the fruits, salary of income, of their benefice in proportion to time of their absence. Yeah, but beyond that, it's a mortal sin. That's what you go to jail. I mean, that's what you go to hell for. They have to go to confession for that one. They got to go to confession for all of them, I guess. But if you don't clear up your mortal sins, you will go to hell. Okay, so it's a mortal sin for the bishop or rectors to violate the law of residence, forfeit the fruits, yada yada. So ask the rector, well, where's the bishop? It would be a mortal sin for him not to have his residence here. Rector, in its widest ecclesiastic sense, is one who sets straight, guides, directs, a rule, or a governor, director, guide, leader. From the Latin, blah blah blah. In classic Latin, a rector may be a ruler, director, naval steerman, from which the sense is derived governor. In ancient times, bishops, as rulers of cities and provinces, especially in the papal states, were called rectors, as were administrators of patrimony of the church. All right. So he's either a bishop or he's an administrator, one or the other. And if he's an administrator, he can do the functions of the bishop, but he can be removed at will instead of because he broke some particular law. One way you can be removed at will, another way you have to have broken a law for them to remove you. But the administrator can be removed at will, where the dean or the bishop can only be removed if he happens to violate the canon law. In the Roman Catholic Church, a rector is a person who holds the office of presiding over the ecclesiastic institution. Okay, well, he's the president of the cathedral. He's got to be the bishop. He's the diocesan bishop, lowercase d. The diocesan bishop, for instance, is himself a rector. Well, there you go. Since he presides over both ecclesiastic organizations, the diocese and the ecclesiastic building, the cathedral. The diocesan bishop is himself a rector. The rector is the diocesan bishop. He's the guy that can sit in the chair, that can give the orders. Not over at the frickin' cathedral, not over at the diocese website, at the cathedral website. Therefore, because a priest is designated head of a cathedral parish, he cannot be both rector and pastor. A rector cannot canonically hold title over a parish. Okay, well, here we go again. Well, is he or isn't? I don't know. Let's just go ask him. But whatever it is, has something to do with the fact that the office that we want, the real chancery office, is at the cathedral. Any more little good ones on here? No. Collegiate church. A collegiate church is not the seat of a bishop and has no diocesan responsibility. Right? So we've been going to these churches looking for these guys called deans and trying to get our local pastors to do something, and they haven't and they can't. The reason they can't is they have no diocesan responsibilities. It's only one place, it appears, and that's the cathedral. From the 11th century forward, the richer collegiate churches tended to provide new status establishing priests of the collegiate or canons with a formal chapter, such that each canon was supported by a separate endowment. Such canons were termed. Okay, I don't know what that has to do with us, so I'm not going to get too much into it. Now here's some bishop canons. All right, this is out of canon law. So 382. Section 3. A bishop takes canonical possession of his diocese when personally or by proxy he shows the apostolic letters to the College of Consultors in the presence of the Chancellor of the Curia, who makes a record of the fact. This must take place within the diocese. In dioceses which are newly established, which is what we have in America, because we don't have the old style diocese, he takes possession when he communicates the same letters to the clergy and people of the cathedral church, with the senior of the priests present making a record of the fact. The diocesan bishop governs the particular church entrusted to him with legislative, executive, judicial power in accordance with the law. The particular church, the cathedral. The bishop exercises legislative power himself. He exercises executive power personally or through vicar general or episcopal vicars in accordance with the law. He exercises judicial power either personally or through judicial vicar and judges in accordance with the law. He's either got deputies or he can do it himself. But it has to do with the particular church. Not the, Diocese of Grand Rapids. St. Andrews, Cathedral of St. Andrews. Since the bishop must defend the unity of the universal church, he is bound to foster the discipline which is common to the whole church and to press for the observance of all ecclesiastical laws at the cathedral. So, diocesan consultors, what we have today, what I believe is what you would call the guys at the cathedral now, these priests like the rector and so forth. We don't have canons that aren't showing up because we don't have these well-established dioceses. We have something that looks like a diocese. It's acting like a diocese, but in the true sense of the word, it's not a diocese as far as they use it in Old Europe. Diocesan consultors are a certain number of priests in each diocese of the United States who act as official advisors of the bishop in certain matters pertaining to the administration of the diocese. As a body, they take the place of the cathedral chapter as established elsewhere by general law of the church. So by common law, there should be these cathedral chapters. But we don't have them. Their appointment was recommended by this Council of Baltimore, and then it was further constituted a diocesan council and defined their particular rights and duties. By giving it rights and duties, they made it a moral person. This group of people is a moral person. The diocesan consultors should be 6 or at least 4 in number. Where neither number is possible, it should be at least 2. There you go. I don't know that we need to get into any more of that other than we need to go talk to them. What we got here? Okay, so this comes out of a book I found. I just cut some pieces out, so I just read them real quick. In the 4th century, priests were established outside the city in the rural districts, but these were excluded from the bishop's council, and so to assist the bishop in administration of the diocese became gradually the sole prerogative of the clergy attached to the cathedral. From the 12th century on, the cathedral chapters especially acquired a great preeminence and were given the exclusive rights of electing the bishop and administering the vacant see, and when the see was occupied, the bishop was obliged in certain cases to seek the chapter's counsel or even consent. Moreover, the chapters were firmly founded upon rich incomes, which all gave the rise abuse. The Council of Trent formulated several decrees for the reformation of the chapter.
A vast virus database has been updated.
Sorry about that. Always retained the rights to assist the bishop in administration of the diocese, even though they weren't there. It was, therefore, the bishop's senate. That's what we're talking about. Can an assemblage, which not strictly a corporation, be regarded as a moral person? Apparently it can. Law generally, whether civil or ecclesiastic, considers the person not so much a physical being endowed with reason and individual existence, but rather as a subject of, should be of, rights or interest. Rights and duties. Ecclesiastic law, inasmuch as it directly considers persons as subjects of rights and duties, defines a person a member of the Catholic Church with the rights and duties attended thereupon all those who are baptized. Alright, so because I'm baptized, I should be a member of the Catholic Church. If I'm a member of the church, I want my ID. I want my citizenship. In other words, by baptism, one became a member of the external ecclesiastical organization, so far from the physical members of the church. But besides these canon laws, civil law recognizes also moral persons, as we have been told, especially by Canon 99. What follows in the subsequent canon 100 is that the very essence of a moral person, be it civil or ecclesiastical law, namely, that it be instituted by competent public authority. We scarcely need to add that the public authority here mentioned is not any civil authority, but solely the superior authorities in the church, i.e., those who possess external jurisdiction in the church. All right, we need to have them, which is probably the rector or somebody acting in the name of the Pope, be the competent public authority. Gives the consultors as a body the same rights and duties that the cathedral chapter possesses in the administration of the diocese, and by the very fact the code, we think, creates the body of consultors into a real collegiate moral person. It's Canon 427, 1917 they're talking about, right? That canon gave all the rights and duties of the cathedral chapter to this group of priests that are at the cathedral. By whatever name they're called, they're at the cathedral. They're not part of the diocesan curia. Here we must remember that the word diocesan embraces also the abbeys and prelature nullices. I think that's what we're in, actually, because we're not in true diocese, because a true diocese has a cathedral chapter. We don't have a cathedral chapter, so we're probably a prelature nullus. The same obligation would be set upon them. In their case, however, diocesan consultors will seldom be necessarily instituted, for they are territories or places subject to the most part a jurisdiction of a monastery or some other religious house. Well, all these guys at mine are part of a religious house called the Paulist Fathers, and therefore will usually be present religious chapters, of which mention made code whatever. These religious chapters, although regulated by their own prescriptions, yet will be readily satisfy the requirements for cathedral chapter as the Senate for the superior, and therefore no new cathedral chapter or body of diocesan consultors will be strictly required. Right? So they didn't, if in fact this group of these priests, these guys here, which they're all CSPs, which is a Paulist father, and that's a religious order. So are they a religious chapter? I guess. I mean, I don't know that much about how it's all set up, but okay, they are a religious order. Because they're there, nobody else needs to be appointed. They are going to be the new cathedral chapter. But it doesn't matter if you don't have people that say CSP at the end of the name. Who's ever at the cathedral makes up the cathedral chapter under a different name. Okay. It's scarcely possible, however, that in a diocese there be found a collegiate chapter where is nothing more than a college of clerics established by the purpose of more solemn worship, performing choral services, common without any other specific duties. If, however, it should happen, inasmuch as it is only the cathedral chapter that from the Senate of the bishop and the diocesan consultors are an institution supply that function to the cathedral chapter, it follows that even in such dioceses, not the collegiate chapter, but the diocesan consultors alone must perform the functions of legal advisors to the bishop. So what that's saying is, in the diocese of Grand Rapids, you're going to find this college of consultors and this Presbyterian council and all this other thing, and they don't have a damn thing to do with running the diocese. It's a head fake. Running the diocese happens one place, at the cathedral, and it's got an official place of business called the Office of the Chancery. The use of the word episcopo instead of the word ordinario does not conflict with the statement made before that the same obligation of founding boards of diocesan consultors rest upon the abbots and prelate nullices who seldom were consecrated bishops. For them, likewise, it is explicitly stated that they enjoy the same power of jurisdiction as a residential bishop. They got all sorts of way to give whoever they need to have the power to do the thing we need to have done, which is have our records put into the right jurisdiction. This is great stuff. Before dissecting the all-important canon, we must recall the twofold nature of the cathedral chapter. All chapters, whether cathedral or collegiate, to use the very words of the new code, are instituted for the offering to God, more solemn worship in churches. Generic duty of chapters, diocesan consultors have nothing expressly in common. But the cathedral chapter, as designated or as distinguished from collegiate chapters, has another duty which practically is the chief reason for its existence. That is, to continue in the word of the same canon, that to assist the bishop in the manner perceived by law as his senate and council, and to supply his place by governing the diocese during the vacancy of the episcopal see. Well, when you say the episcopal see, who is the episcopal see? It's got to be the Pope. It is therefore in the nature of the official and legal advising body that the diocesan consultors supply the place of the cathedral chapter, and that there may be no possible doubt. Canon 427 continues to state most explicitly that any right or duty assigned by law to the cathedral chapter in matters pertaining to administration of the diocese, whether the see be occupied or vacant, or the administration of the see only impeded, is to be applied with equal force and value the body of the diocesan consultors. They got the same power. In reference to the canons which concern the internal government of the chapter, we must understand that due to its twofold character, the duties of the cathedral chapter possess a twofold organization. As constituting ex officio, of course we don't have a chapter, so what are you going to do? A senate and council for the bishop, which is imitated by the diocesan consultors. Really, that's the only part we care about for what we need. But part of this, in common with other chapters, is its own distinct organization as a college of clerics organized for the greater solemnity of worship. So they're going to all get together and pray together. One of the board is made the secretary, and in the United States it's usually the bishop's chancellor. Right? Well, been kind of looking for the chancellor for a long time. Right? You want to go to the court of chancery to get an original writ under the great seal from the court of chancery to determine the rights, title, and interest to your property. Because America was founded following what happened in England more than what happened in France and Spain, which were Catholic nations that basically the Protestant English overthrew their territory, took their property, had to start over. It follows the English model. Diocesan consultors are to be called ex officio to attend the diocesan synod, and they are bound by law to obey this call, as all having care of souls were summoned to attend the diocesan synods. But if it should happen that the diocesan consultor be chosen, say, from among the professors of a seminary, by the provision of this canon, he may be called to attend the synod in virtue of his office as a diocesan consultor. So go look at that. You could have a guy as a professor at a seminary who's part of your diocesan consultors. He doesn't necessarily need to be at the diocese performing a function at the diocese. He can be performing a function somewhere else, which again is kind of interesting because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's 2 other ones that are part of the same group that are all together. This Paulist Fathers out of Grand Rapids. There's 6 of them altogether, and 2 of them are at some other parishes. But that would make the number up of 6 that they were supposed to have, and they appoint 1 to be their fearless leader. Well, I'd give them 7, give them 6 and a head. So Anyway, well, we already looked at that. There's one last thing. I mean, it's always good to know. Just this last week, there is a heck of a lot going on if you just pay attention to little things that are said. So, for instance, a couple weeks ago, the Pope excommunicated all members of the mafia, organized crime. Well, we should be able to use that against the people we're going into court against because they're using color of law, which is a human rights violation, and they're doing it to take your property, and it's organized. There's more than a couple of them involved, so it's RICO, so it's organized crime, so they've been excommunicated. So we should be able to get a decree issued, and their life should be shut off, right? They just turn off their patrimony. That's good to know. So they've all been excommunicated. Well, that means a judge has been excommunicated, and for a judge to be a judge, or a notary to be a notary, or any of these people to be who they are, they need to be a notary. And a notary is an ecclesiastic office, and you can't hold an ecclesiastic office if you have been excommunicated. So they'd have to step down. So now they're usurping an ecclesiastic office. Right, so that's good. Then they came out and they said they're going to change the bank. And they're getting rid of the investment part of the Vatican Bank, and all it's going to have now is going to be for payment services. And you read the article, though, and they're talking about gaining customers, and all they're going to be is a payment service. That's interesting. Where's the customers coming from? And then, they just here in the last week or so, they're recognizing exorcists. The Vatican Congregation of Clergy has recognized the International Association of Exorcists under canon law. Under the law, they now say it exists. And why is that important? Because now you could legally say, I believe he's possessed. Right? And the reason that's good for them is because if they're possessed by the devil, then they're not responsible for their actions and they can be forgiven. They just need to have an exorcism done. And so all these yahoos that join the frickin' Masons and open themselves up to be satanic sock puppets, right, who are basically being run by Satan and don't even know what they're doing. They're just the vehicle, right? They can have an exorcism. You could say that man's possessed, not that he's mentally incompetent. That could be considered slander. No, say he's possessed, right? A man must be possessed to be using simulated legal process and color of law, which are crimes against humanity, against me as I stand here to take my property. Must be possessed, right? Hey, this man's possessed. Let's get in there and give him an exorcism. Right? It's all because now it's under canon law, man. Exorcisms are under canon law. Yeah, we're going to bring back the Inquisition peacefully. For many people, the idea that all of their previous socially and morally unacceptable behaviors has not, in fact, their fault, but due to possession by demons is appealing. Furthermore, once the demons have been exorcised, the repentant sinner is now welcomed back into the loving arms of his or her community. It's a win-win for everybody. We're going to see where that plays out. But yeah, all these little things are going on. It's wonderful. Wonderful stuff. So, the cathedral is a particular church, and it's the particular church that is a member of the body of Christ. Not the local parish down the road. No. The cathedral. Where the completeness of the church is. Well, for the completeness of the church, and that's where the courts are, because that's the part we can't find. And they have an office of the chancery. And it offers the ministry of hospitality. It actually offers many ministries, but you got the ministry of hospitality. You know that the ministry of exorcism is one that can be given to the laity. That's the function of a laity, to cast out demons. But I think you might have to know Latin, right? But to be a hospitality doesn't take anything. And this this rector on here, he did a little intro video, and it's kind of interesting. We're talking about the cathedral and the parish, and it's the rector. It's not the bishop, it's the rector. And this rector says that, 3 or 4 different times, this is a special church. It's a special church. By the way, it's a special church. Right? There's something special about this church. And it is not the same as get it right, Bob. The other one. That's the cathedral. And the cathedral is not the same as the Roman Catholic Diocese of Grand Rapids. Right, who has for its bishop David J. Walkowiak. Now this could be a two-hatted dude here, right? This guy is the guy that could actually be. He could be the archdeacon. I have to see where he was ordained a priest. Show me he was ordained a priest. I know he was ordained a deacon. Show me he was ordained a priest. None of that matters, right? We just go to we're going to go ask questions at the cathedral. So, in the last week, Roe had sent a petition for hierarchical recourse to the diocesan bishop, care of the cathedral, but they forwarded it to her diocese bishop of the bishop of Rockford, Illinois. Bobby sent his. Now Bobby talked to he's in Arizona, and because we had found this PDF from Toledo explaining in the definitions that there was a guy called the bishop's delegate for hierarchical recourse, and when you read what it said in there, that the petitions for hierarchical recourse, for conciliation, for arbitration, all went to this guy called the bishop's delegate. Okay. So Bob called there and said, well, who's the bishop's delegate? If I wanted to do this, who do I send my who would I send? Who's the bishop's delegate? And so he's talking to somebody who ended up saying he's a priest and he was the chancellor. This is interesting. So I don't know that it's the chancellor at the diocese. It could be the chancellor at the cathedral. He said, send it registered mail, return receipt requested to the bishop. Bob said, the bishop of the diocese? And he said, yes. Okay, well, the book says you're going to send it to the bishop's delegate, and this guy is saying send it to the bishops of the diocese. Diocese of Phoenix. Like this dude in the picture here, but this Grand Rapids, but send it to this guy. Well, okay, is that this priest confirming that the guy we think is a bishop is actually a bishop's delegate? Or is he the bishop and they're just not following their own rules? But it definitely says you would send your petition to the bishop's delegate. And now this priest is telling Bob to send it to the guy that we think is the bishop of Phoenix. And then they told Roe when they got hers that they had forwarded hers to the bishop of Rockford. So we'll see where those go, right? But what we're trying to say in those is, look, we've gone these other directions. Nobody will help us. We need hierarchical recourse, blah, 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 blah. Where it could be, after looking at this stuff, well, we just haven't gone to the right office and given them our birth certificate. Because they record births, deaths, and marriages in the chancery of the particular church. Well, I bet you they confirm, they probably could record your confirmation certificate or your baptismal certificate. We know that that's our point. This stuff has never made it to the part of the universal church. It's sitting in a local parish that, as it turns out, has nothing to do with the diocese, so it has nothing to do with the universal church as far as the government of the church. It's just a guy out there with holy water. That's all he can do. So, okay, I'm going to leave it at that, and hope it wasn't too confusing, but lots to go through. We'll see what this week brings. You all have a great day, and again, if you can, do that, please, 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 donate. Write it down. Make the call. Yeah, please help if you can. Thanks. See ya.